Hey, hey.
Hey,
Feel like I just saw you, which is kind of cool.
I know, right? It's like our
Yeah.
25th episode. I think tomorrow is officially a year for us. So yay us
Yay.
for being in
Yep.
these conversations.
Happy anniversary. That's good
Yes,
stuff.
happy anniversary too. Yeah.
Good stuff. Yeah.
What's
Yeah.
been on your
Lots to
mind?
celebrate there. Um, we were just talking and power has just been on my mind a lot lately. For so many different reasons. I've been having conversations on my team about centering and support and how they're different and how they're one of the ways they're different is like one is informed by access to power and like who has more power in this situation and who has less. So I'm thinking about that. I'm always thinking about power from like a parenting perspective. um yeah, I'm thinking about power as I try to build community and what does shared power look like. Is there, right? Yeah, just thinking about the binary between power over and power under, and thinking about shared power or sacred power. It just, yeah, it's complicated. So I've just been
Mm,
thinking about it a lot.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. It's interesting because I'm thinking um, what I've been thinking about a lot the last couple of days, which I think is related to power, is um, how much the so much of the world, particularly the United States, doesn't like to share power.
Mm.
And I guess like I'm like I was talking, I'm doing this like Buddhist Sangha thing where we meet like every couple of weeks, and I have a practice partner where we meditate together every other week
Mm.
together, which is like lovely to meditate with somebody else rather than just
Yeah.
myself. And like we've been practicing this thing where like it's like mindful listening, where like I talk for a few minutes and she just listens, and then we meditate, and then she talks for a few minutes, and it's been lovely.
Wow.
Someone I don't know, right? Like I've just met her.
Wow.
We were partnered together, and she happens to be in New York, and she actually was is an alumni of Columbia University, and so part of what she was sharing was that it's like her 10-year anniversary of graduating from Columbia, from like a graduate program of some sort, and that her and her friend group is like wrestling with all the stuff going on with, I don't know how much you've heard of like the protests that have been happening on the Columbia campus
Mm.
around like free Palestine and like
Mhm.
solidarity with Palestine, which is a diversity of students, Jewish students, Muslim students, um, Christian students, white students, global majority students, and they have had like chemical attacks. They've been arrested, they've been expelled, they've been suspended. Like the administration is like, shut
Whoa.
this down, right?
Whoa.
And so I think about, I'm often wondering like, how much am I willing to risk for liberation, for
Yeah.
anti-racism, for anti-oppression? And I think these students are willing to risk their academic career. Like the school can just say, you are expelled, you're
Right.
suspended, we're going to arrest you.
Oh
Like, and
God.
how will that change their life? Um, and I just think about, why is peaceful protesting so activating for people that
Mm-hmm.
they then do power over,
Mm-hmm.
right? And like, yeah, and I just think about like why it seems really hard to think about how do you share power. I'm also listening to this book by Ijeoma Olu called Be a Revolution, which is like every chapter is dedicated to some other activist and the ways in which they are sharing power. So like whether it's like addressing sexual assault, whether it's around like unions or like food insecurity, or like reimagining ways people could share power that is liberatory,
Mm.
right? Like I love reading the book because it gives me hope that people are doing it, and it's in modern day. Like we're not talking about 50 years ago, like in modern
Yeah.
day, people are doing it, and maybe they're only known in their pocket of the world, but they're, so I think your idea of like this power sharing, like there has to be something more than power over and power under.
Yes.
But like, how do we build the muscle, the embodiment, the capacity? Like, how do we get out of fight or flight to think like we can share that power.
Yeah. Yes. And I feel like so much of what we talk about goes back to like distress tolerance, right? And like the ability, right. And there's also something about using your, like, I think when we are imbued with power, like it or not, right? As a parent even, right? Like I didn't have children to like have power, but I do because I'm a parent. It's just, it's part of the thing, right? And so it's almost like a deconstruction of what it means to have power or to be a leader, that I think all the messaging has been so, I think this is a gross generalization, but kind of like masculine in nature, that like power is power. We have this conditioned, stereotyped package of what we've been messaged that power is. And I wonder if part of it is, certainly for me at least, this process has been a deconstructor of what I think to be power.
Mm-hmm.
Like being a leader doesn't mean you call all the shots, that everyone is like deferential to you all the time, that you don't exert control and authority like when somebody upsets you or like disagrees with you. Like it's, I've needed to deconstruct all the things that I thought like sturdy leadership was, in order to be open to what shared power could look like. And of course, I probably have to like be able to tolerate a lot of distress and discomfort along the way, because I just think there's a lot of interesting things happening in spaces that are aimed at helping neurodivergent parents parent differently. And there's a lot of similarities here between, we've got to deconstruct parenting for neurodivergent kids, because like the way we parent neurotypical kids does not work for neurodivergent kids.
So what would be an example for those who maybe don't know what that
Like that when a kid is kind of like having a meltdown, that kind of like typical parenting or parenting for neurotypical kids might be like, you need like more punitive, or like you need space, or you're like angry, and like, and that might work for some kids, like they might need some space. But for a lot of neurodivergent kids, like they need to know, and I think really all kids, but anyway,
I was gonna say, I think it's all kids.
I think it's all
I think
kids,
it's like the old school timeout
right?
versus the more like interpersonal neurobiology that like we need like connection first.
Right. Or even something like, I'm in this group for parents who have anxious kids. And they're like, don't, part of what the group aims to do is to reduce the amount of accommodating behaviors that parents do. So it's like when your kid is anxious about something, you don't just make it better for them or something.
Mm-hmm.
But in a lot of like autistic spaces, accommodations are required in that moment. Like we have to decrease their stress load in order for them to be able to like get to the other side of it, and like talk to them about it. So I don't, it's just this, I think there's parallels with like,
well, it sounds like part of it is like know your kid, right? Like, and so like what kind of support does your kid need to regulate themselves?
and can't we use some of this as a model for like how we can be sturdy leaders in other areas of our life, right? Like that the CEO of every company probably can't just read some book on like what it means to be a good CEO, right? Like which implies that we can't be transactional, that we have to like really know the people and the culture that we're trying to everything just needs to be like, take more time and be more intentional. I feel like I'm being circular, but am I making sense?
Yeah. It's so funny. As you were talking, I had this flash. I have to tell you about this encounter I had this weekend, which was somebody I didn't know reached out to me a couple weeks ago. Uh, Long story short, this 89-year-old white guy, retired attorney, reached out and left a message for me at my work to say like he was just interested in the anti-racism work I was doing and like was interested in meeting me. So of course my spouse is like, you're gonna meet this. It's like we're meeting in like a coffee shop, like I think it'll be fine. It's a public place. I mean, so we met on Saturday morning and it was very nice, you know. But what happened is, so we met at this coffee shop, and there's so many things I could talk about in this thing, but I think it's like generational differences.
Sure.
So part of what happened in this conversation was he started to get distracted by this family that was like a mom and two like toddlers, and at least one of the toddlers was loud like loud for him. Like I noticed, but it didn't bother me that much. And at some point he said like, I'm sorry, I'm just so distracted. That mom can't control her kid. And in my mind, I physically did something, but I didn't say anything. But in my mind, I was thinking like, that is so old school, like that a parent can control their kid. And how many of us have that judgment of like when we see a kid reacting a particular way, we think that the parent can have power over that kid versus like
and ought to have power over, right?
Yeah, right. Like, so which would have to be some sort of punitive or shaming thing in order versus like, I guess like the default wasn't like compassion for the parent, like, or the kid, right? Like that there might be a reason why the kid is cranky or whatever it might be. But it was just so interesting just to think about the way we've been socialized to think about power and parenting, or even like teaching a class, or what happens in the therapy room, or what happens in a business. Like if there isn't order and control, it's almost like something is amok.
Right. And yeah. So do you remember, it's a terrible, terrible psych experiment that happened a long, long time ago, where they took this random group of people and they assigned some of them to play the role of like someone in jail, someone who's incarcerated.
Yes, they made a movie out of this.
Did they really?
Because I was randomly flipping through channels, or no, that's not true. I turned on the TV and the TV was on a channel where it was like the prison experiment. I was like, they made this into a movie.
Oh my God, is that the Netflix thing that's out right now?
Oh, is that what it is? I don't know.
I don't know.
I watch too many streaming things. So when I see things on TV, I don't know what it's about. But I was like, what is this? It's like, anyway, yes. But
the last couple of times I've turned on Netflix, there's been a thing where it's like a jail cell, and then it's, you know, Netflix is offering 3 words underneath it. And I remember one of the words saying experimental. So I bet that's what it is.
Oh, yeah, maybe that's what it is. But this idea that we as humans can like take on these roles, like even if they're not like who we are, who we consider ourselves to be regularly, but put into a certain context.
Right. Which means the script, and obviously that experiment is like more nuanced even there, but like still the script for "you're in charge" is clearly so problematic.
Yeah, absolutely.
That when we simply say to someone "you're in charge," or imply that they are in charge because they become a parent or because they get a promotion and now they're managing people. Like so so many of us must have this like somewhat unconscious script or schema for how we're supposed to behave and things that we're supposed to say or things that we're supposed to do when we've been given power. And then it just like, if it's not conscious, then it's just like, it's playing out in these like oppressive ways because that's the script.
Yeah. And I think it goes both ways, because I think there are people who like exert power over. But then I think there are those who do like, I don't know if power under would be the right phrasing, but like are so afraid of owning power or channeling the power
Yes.
that they like um, are very differential. And I think sometimes that's cultural, sometimes that's part of people's personality and relational style. But sometimes, in my biased opinion, I think it's too much. Like we don't really get to know who they fully are because
Yes.
they are so not. Um, I don't know what the right word is, like showing up in their full power, whatever that is. Right? They could
Mm-hmm.
have a soft, gentle touch, but like I think sometimes some people are so afraid to assert themselves or to have an opinion.
Yes. And that's so I'm listening. I talked about it in our last one, but that book that I'm reading about women in power. So it's called Unbound: A Woman's Guide to Power. Um, and but this could apply to so many folks who've been given the message and are treated as second class citizens, right? Um, but her thing was women don't embody their power. And because of that, they collude in these dynamics where they aren't getting their needs met and have lots of feelings about that, understandably so. And she does this fine line between, she's not blaming women for that. She clearly blames patriarchy and white supremacy and names all these things and offers a different solution to, like, yes, should we try to continue to dismantle these oppressive systems? Absolutely. And how can you embrace your power? How can you say what you need in a way that's congruent, not like, can we maybe eat dinner there? Which gives a mixed message, which like our animal brains and bodies don't respond well to. It's
Right.
really fascinating thinking about both of those scenarios. Yeah,
Yeah.
right. So it feels like part of it is owning our own power.
Mm-hmm.
Which I think I said this to you before we started, which I think a huge piece of that is just being embodied,
Yeah.
right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It's interesting. So last podcast, I was talking about the book I read last week called Quiet. Like it was like talking about basically introverts. But one of the things she talks about in this book, Quiet, is about how like historically, like people prefer extroverts as leaders, but that actually like introverts are actually quite effective as leaders, partly because they don't take up as much space. And so in some ways they share power more. And it allows like more creativity to happen on their teams and like other people to be able to like step into their power or into like their strengths. So it's so interesting just even to think like extrovert, introvert, like different styles of being in the world and how that might promote something on a team.
Yeah. Yeah, that is really interesting. I don't know. I feel excited about this idea of deconstructing how power has been messaged to us, combined with being deeply in touch with ourselves and in our bodies to be able to say, oh, that doesn't feel good, or I feel really excited when, because I feel like if you don't have access to that information, there's no way you can possibly
Right.
move around in the world sharing that. But that feels exciting to me as like a way. We're stuck with some of these systems, right? But if the people at the top of these systems had a different way of understanding their
Right.
power, and we could talk to them about what shared power looks like, and there's a different way to do
Right.
power, like
Mm-hmm.
that's cool.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, it makes me think of like when people say like the more that um, companies or businesses are female led, like the more like culture starts to change. Um, and I guess I agree to that to a point, I imagine, right? Like that, if we're more focused on like relational stuff, which so many female identifying people have been socialized into like taking care of the relationship, as long as those individuals are embodied and healthy and able to share power, then like I could see that could be revolutionary. That, I've definitely had male identifying bosses who were great at sharing power, but it's more rare. I just think it's more rare.
Yeah. Right. Like I'm sure in large part because of the way we're socialized. And yeah. When I brought this up at the beginning, your face was like, oh, it's really complicated. It's really complicated. I want to know more about
Yeah.
that reaction.
Yeah. I mean, I think because I think power means different things to different people.
Sure.
So I guess I'm always thinking about like, how do we decenter whiteness? Right. And so like, I guess I think about like, what are the models in particularly like non-colonial places where they do a really great job of sharing power. And I feel like I don't know enough about those places. And I think because I think sometimes when we think about power, we think about it from the place of like power over or like power represented in a particular way. So I would say like if I'm going to get personal, like if I think about like sometimes when people meet me, right, they like I think I'm a quiet person in general, but I'm more quiet in certain contexts, right? Sure. So I think if people met me in certain places, they might, assume things about me.
Oh yeah.
That maybe I'm not that assertive or that I like, don't have a lot of opinions or whatever, but it's more like the introvert in me needs a minute, or even if I don't need a minute, I don't always feel the need to share. But like if I needed to assert myself, I would. And so I guess I think about like there's so many people moving around in the world who are probably like me, where they channel their power in a different way that is maybe more internal and not as showy. Right. And so could they be judged in a particular way based on Western like, ideas of power?
Yeah. I'm so intrigued when you say channel their power more internally. Is that like embodiment, distress tolerance, so that when like you do say something, it's like it goes right there rather than words. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just know that's my style, right? Like it's not, I've kind of always been like this, so I can't imagine any other way. And I guess it goes back to like this question of like parenting, because I think like we're both parenting neurodiverse kids, right? And so thinking about like how do we make, and I think whether you're a parent, you're a leader, you're a teacher, you're someone in a partnership with someone, whatever, you have friends, is like how do we tailor things to the people we're in relationship with?
Yeah.
Right? Like there isn't one size fits all. And I think part of the problem with some of the conversations around, let's say, DEI or anti-racism or liberation is that people imagine it's this narrow version of what it could be.
Right.
Versus like it's liberation for, not saying everybody has to be the same. It's saying that like, can we respect all the different ways that people can show up in life? And can we tailor our systems so everyone has a capacity to thrive?
Right.
And that we're not going to leave anybody behind.
Right.
But I don't think people can even imagine that.
No. You okay? Yeah.
Yeah. Your buds came out.
Oh, okay. Good deal. Right. Right. Then when we think about like deconstructing power, like what comes to me is then there's this other way to do it. And it's like, that's not it. There's 100 other ways to do that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And I think that cuts across whatever we're talking about, right? So if we're, talking about, how do people teach in school, right? How do they recognize there are all these students who like learn in so many different ways. And I can't even imagine how do you create an environment where all of them can be doing well. And I think that's where it gets messy.
Yeah.
And I think we're overwhelmed. I think I think the world is moving too fast and we're not catching up.
Yeah. Right.
And that's making us behave badly.
And that's making us behave badly and right and just like wish for when America was great, right? Because it's like
Ah,
it's just so much simpler if we get to ignore
right.
all these people who are complicated and different and like make us feel all these things. It's
Mhm.
just so much easier
Right.
for white-bodied people to be like, oh, let's just ignore all that.
Yeah. And I think it's like all these privileged bodies, right? Like Christian bodied people,
Yeah,
heterosexually bodied people, like
yeah,
cisgendered bodied people, able bodied people. Like it just goes, the list goes on and on and on of like all these
yeah,
ways in which um, people are not, some people are not seeing as like, well, if I'm nervous, maybe this is a growing edge for me.
right.
Versus like if I'm nervous,
It's just
my life
bad.
is in danger, I need to stop this now in the harshest
Right,
means possible.
right, right, right. Yeah. So
I think
we're,
that's why this college stuff is like so bothering me. I mean, on many levels, but I guess I think about like if college is a place where people are expanding and learning and like
yeah,
discerning and like we want to build future leaders and creativity, why would we want to stomp that? Like, why
yeah,
wouldn't we want to encourage peaceful protesting and like that, especially if it's not meant to be harming anyone? It's actually in spirit of like humanity doing better. And I
yeah,
guess like I feel like if you're threatened by liberation, then what's going on with you?
right.
That you are seeing this as a threat rather than an opportunity where we all could win.
Well, it makes me get curious about all the reasons why, the possible reasons why they shut it down, right? I am assuming the university didn't offer explanation.
Oh, I think that they code it as it's anti-Semitic, even though there are Jewish students who are also participating in the peaceful protesting.
So
I
one
think
of
I
the,
think there are a lot of schools who just you say the word Palestine and shut it down.
shut it down. And certainly some of that is racism, right? And unconscious bias and prioritizing um whiter or lighter skinned, people, white bodied people. Um, I also wonder if part of it is again like anxiety and distrust tolerance about like, well, if there's peaceful protesting, how much longer until other people come and protest? And then we're going to have like civil war. And like that, again, because so few people have understanding of what's going on inside of themselves, and then the ability to sit with that and make sense of that, and then the ability to communicate that.
Mhm.
Like we just run with our thoughts, which are often the worst case scenario and catastrophizing and fear based,
Mhm.
and then make decisions from this place of like the world is going to end unless we
Yeah.
do this now. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's like, look, can we just like breathe for a moment? Can
Yeah.
we just
Yeah.
pause?
Yeah. Well, I think the way because it's been going on for months, like um probably since like October, November. So I guess what but a lot of people are supporting it, right? Like so people are supporting these punitive measures, right? Because like if an institution, right, like made like these harsh measures and donors or alumni were against it,
Yes.
it
Yep.
wouldn't fly, right? And so I just think about, the presidents of these Ivy schools who were dismissed or resigned abruptly because of just all of this anxiety in the air
Yep.
and like this that there's only one right way and if you make a
Mm-hmm.
mistake you're done, there is
Yep.
no opportunity to make things right. And
That's
I think
right.
like that's to me the problematic part is hold people accountable. If people mess up, if people cause harm, hold them accountable, right? So like that's the power, right? Is like
Yep.
hold them accountable, but give them a chance to make repairs.
Right.
Give them
It should
a
be
chance to learn
restored.
differently. Yeah, absolutely. And that's more sharing power. It's
Yeah.
like, how do we make this restorative? Because things aren't getting better.
Yeah. Right. Oh yeah, you're right, the collective anxiety, and it's coming from everywhere, right? Because like there's anxiety about, I imagine for these people, there's anxiety about like what's happening in the world. I hope there's anxiety about what's happening in the world or feelings about what's happening in the world. Then there's the anxiety of what's happening on the campus and what it means and how people are going to right. So it's like, of course, then everyone is operating from
Yeah,
out of fight, flight,
sure,
and
absolutely. And we're in
fear.
a major election year. I was just talking to someone earlier today about like she's dreading the election just because it's so activating and so many
So
people are anxious, right? And so and it's unclear how it will all unfold. So yeah, where do
that's,
people learn these stress tolerance skills?
and I'm sure that's another level too, right? Because a lot of these like big places have some kind of vested interest. And so, I mean, it's just so multi-layered, all the levels of anxiety and control and like, and
Yeah,
trying to control
yeah,
a million outcomes and a million people.
yeah. But at the end of the day, who's really safe?
Right, right. Ugh. Ugh. Makes
Yeah.
it's got my heart racing, and yeah, it's really it's so frustrating.
And yet, this is how change happens
Yeah,
in all of this messiness.
right.
And
And not
that
running away from it, right?
the existing systems of oppression will fight against liberation, against progress.
Right. And it's the ability to sit in it, right? Because like it would be very, I feel emotional per usual. Um, and I think it's really easy, like when we start to have all these feelings about the systems of oppression, whatever, that it's like, it's so much easier to like look away, run away, um, or try to stomp it down, right? Fight or flight, that's what it is. And so again, to like, just really like work this muscle of like, what do I have to do to stay?
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I've been trying to, focus on my own self and like what are ways I can keep evolving and I am someone who I think has pretty good distress tolerance and I try not to get hijacked by my emotions most of the time, but doesn't stop worry thoughts from coming and going. And my son is 16 and he's like ready to get his learner's permit to be able to drive. And I filled out the forms this weekend and like picked a driving school. And the guy came to pick up the forms. And it was this middle-aged white guy. And I had this like initial, when I saw him, this initial worry thought of like I hope that you'll treat him well. I just wonder like what are your own biases and I
I,
hope that you've worked on them. And then I'm saying this out loud and then I'm wondering about like when he gets his license and the whole driving while black and then like how do I make sure like I teach him about that while also not wanting being black to be a burden because there's so much wonder like so it's all those things but it's like if other people aren't doing the work to unpack their unconscious biases I and many other parents of black and brown kids need to continue to have the talks and prepare them for how to be
right,
in society to minimize their risk.
right.
And it's like, story as old as time.
Yeah, right. And then the inequity of the labor is all on Black and brown families
Mm-hmm.
to try to keep their kids safe while also not instilling so much fear that they can't function
Yeah,
in the world because
yeah,
so many other people aren't doing their work and talking to
right.
families and
Right. Right.
yeah.
It's like it's a way that you instill power in them by recognizing, okay, you might need to coach switch in this way in order to not threaten other people, or not have the perception of threat by other people. And yet, how do you do that in a way that doesn't make you feel like you're less than?
Right. Right. Oh, and I already can hear what you're gonna say to this. Because I'm back at like, God, we gotta do more work with leaders, with people who have power, and it's like, yes, and we can't make people do the work.
Mhm.
We can't make people do the work. And so
Yeah. So this other interesting thing, there were so many interesting things with this white guy, this 8 or 9 year old guy, who, you know, uh, he was talking about anger and how anger is a bad thing. He was telling me the story of like someone he knows, who's been like a politician for a long time. He like had a long political career. A black guy who, um, he says is angry, and I said, "Oh, that could be a great thing, right?" Because I'm all about anger and rage and
yeah,
like
alchemy.
and I said that sounds healthy for him to be angry because he's probably seen a lot of injustice. And I would actually be worried about him if he didn't have some anger. And so he looked at me and he was kind of like, I guess I hadn't thought about it that way. He's
Hey,
like, but he was saying this black guy was saying that this white guy could do more by talking to his white friends and like peers, right?
sure.
And he wanted to know what I thought about that. And I said, yeah, I think that makes a big difference. Someone like me could come and do a one-time workshop, but that's not necessarily going to change hearts and minds, and it's not going to do the long-term
Right.
work. And so, but when he talked to, I guess, his white friends were like, no, you shouldn't be talking to us about that stuff. You should have somebody else come who's like a black person come and teach us. And so it's like we need both, right? You need the
Yes,
experts,
that's right.
but you also need to do your own work in everyday life. But I just think about how many spaces are like 98 or 100% white, and they're getting no other noise to disrupt the ways that they've been socialized.
Right.
And so I'm always inviting white people to do more in their spaces to like bring up the conversation or like see how it's relevant to whatever's being happening in that room.
Right. Right. Yeah. I'm chuckling because I resonate with this on in my own spaces where I have some power or leadership responsibilities. The responses when I try to lead my team, or whatever community I'm a part of through some of these conversations, and how that is received, versus when I bring a person of color in to talk about these things. And there is a damned if you do, damned if you don't quality. But to your point, it's exactly why we need both, and not on a one-time basis, like continually, right? Because perhaps if it's only talked about once with each party, then that is transactional, right? Then then
Right.
it does make sense for there to be pushback and challenging of motivation and whatever. And it's only when it's longer term work, which can only be done through behavior over time, right?
Right.
That's something big I've learned along my journey. Is like, it's just you can't rush this stuff because it's got to be genuine.
Mm-hmm.
And time is
Absolutely.
the only way to tell if something is really genuine and
Yeah.
really getting in,
Yeah.
because transformation is a process that takes time, and
Yeah.
it's very easy to perform. So
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. And it's like this white body supremacy gets into every nook and cranny, right? So if we're not leaning into it every day,
right.
we're going to miss all the subtle ways it shows up.
Yeah. Yeah, right. And again, for those of us who are leaders or who have power in some ways, that will fuck up the ways that we lead. and make us rely on the dominant scripts that we've been given, and which we know are mostly profoundly unhelpful.
Yeah. And I
Yep.
think most white teams don't want to hear that they need to do their own inner work first before they bring more people of the global majority onto their teams. Right. They often want it to be the reverse. They bring them on their teams, and by bringing them on their team starts to change. But like, at what cost to those
That's right.
employees?
Yeah. Yeah, I know. Yep. Yeah. Oh, lots
So yeah,
there. Yeah.
it's complicated.
It is complicated. But whenever I start to feel like really frustrated, or like I feel like hopelessness like creeping in, or like just not hopelessness, that's too extreme, but like despair. When I feel despair creeping in, like the practice that I'm getting into, that I hope is helpful for maybe our white-bodied listeners, is just again to remember, like, where do I have power? Because I cannot change things happening all over the world, or like in so many places I may not be able to enact change, like big change, obvious change, transformational change, but I always have power in my own life, in my own body, in my voice. Yeah, I have power to slow down. I have power to reflect. I have power to use my power and privilege. And so that I always feel like, whew, like more embodied and like less fearful or angry when I remind myself of that. So I just need to say that out loud.
Yeah. And I would say, as like someone who's like a body of culture or person of the global majority, that, you know, I often think about like, okay, so like I'm observing all of these systems of oppression and all the ways in which Black lives don't matter systemically and culturally. But that does not interfere with my own journey of personal liberation.
Yes.
Right. And so this both and, how do I, because I think sometimes people think like, oh, well, if we acknowledge all of the systemic racism, then that's like inviting in victimhood, when really it's like an invitation into liberation, right?
Yeah.
Into like, into
Yes.
understanding all of these factors that play out, that impact some of us more than others, that we can still find a place of liberation, even if it's small.
Totally. Right. Well, and it's just back to what we're talking about. Like I keep saying, like sacred power, like embodiment. It's just our own agency, right? Like where can we hold on to our own agency, even if it's small, or in not all the places where we would want it to be, right? That is a very, for me, that's a very liberating thing to anchor into when I feel despair about the world.
Yeah. And it's like, what parts can we do to encourage curiosity and bravery in people?
Yeah.
Right. In a time where there's so much fear, to be brave, to be curious about why we're anxious, or why we're afraid, or why we're turning away, or why we're despairing. Like, how can we turn towards that?
Yeah.
So that it's maybe that we can chip away at that.
Yeah. That'd be good.
Yeah.
Maybe you and I'll get back to one of these days to figuring out a way to partner to help people become more embodied, as in service of that. That'd be cool.
Yeah, that sounds good.
Cool. All right.
All right.
Always lovely talking to you.
Yeah, same. And just a note for people that this is episode 25, and episode 24 isn't available on YouTube, because it was kind of like a talkback session where other people were part of the conversation. And so, but it isn't available. It will be available wherever you listen to podcasts. So if you're wondering what happened to episode 24, it's out there. It's just not on YouTube. So thanks
Great reminder
for listening. And we're always interested in hearing what you have to say.
Yeah, like, comment, share. Awesome.
Cool. Till we meet again.
Okay. Bye.